Hello everyone, it's Lindsay, and today I'm back with another Bible journaling process video for you guys. I'm continuing to work through the current kit from Open Journey. This is Living Stones. I have a detailed unboxing of the entire release. I'll put that down below for you guys, as well as the prior process video I did, and I've been doing Word Study Wednesday again with this kit, so there's going to be lots of content for you guys. This video will be structured very similar to the last one. I have some study notes that I want to share with you, a lot, like 3 double-sided pages, and then we'll do an art process. So I will have a timestamp down in the description box for you guys. If you want to just jump to the art process, you can do that, but definitely would encourage you to stick around for the notes that I put together for today's entry. While we're talking about notes, so I have been just putting them together on the computer and printing them out for the sake of these videos, just to have them all organized. You know that I've been working in my growth book for my other devotionals, but for this one from Open Journey, I decided to grab a couple of these. So Ingrid from Open Journey does have a Redbubble account, and so this is a website where she can upload her art, and then you can order it on different items, bags, journals, all kinds of different things. There's even bedding on there if you want that. So I grabbed a couple of these journals. Now these are a little bit smaller. So these are, the pages are about 5, from the coil is 5.5 by 8.25. So they're smaller than a traditional, letter size paper, but they have the artwork from the devotional kit for Living Stones. I grabbed 2 because I'm going to be transferring all of these notes I've been printing. I'm going to write them in the notebook, and I figured I'm probably going to need 2 of these. They are coil bound, so if you wanted to create and use these as art journals, you definitely could do that if you'd rather do that than work in a journaling Bible. But again, these are just going to be for my notes, and they have 2 different options. They have this cross grid, or they have just traditional notebook lines. The paper is nice and smooth. It is not super thick paper though. So if you're going to be journaling in here, you are definitely, like art journaling with paint and stuff, you're definitely going to want to prep this with gesso. But they are really nice little journals. And in the back, they even have a double pockets. If you want to store stickers and things like that, you definitely can. So I grabbed 2 different ones, and again, I'll be transferring all my notes into here. So I wanted to note that, because from here on out, you may be seeing more of those notebooks. But for the art process, here's a little sneak peek. I made friends with my jelly plate. So the art process for this video will be involving some jelly print techniques here, and this is a great way to do mixed media and then insert this into your Bible if you're not wanting to create, directly messy in your Bible. I know that that can be a little intimidating, so stay tuned. Later on in the video, I'll be showing you that. But let's dive into the study notes. So I'm moving on to the second part of the devotional. This is Rock in the Wilderness, and this is broken up into 2 different sections. We are looking at the different accounts of Moses striking the rock in the wilderness and providing water for the Israelites. And so I will be journaling in 1 Corinthians. Let's see, chapter 10, verse 4 will be the focus passage that I will be journaling on, but we're going to cover quite a bit here. So let me kind of move things out of the way, and we'll dive into those notes. I don't have my MacArthur Study Bible out, though I did have it to put together these notes. This time I just included them in my notes, so we don't have to be directly in the Bible. So jumping right in, I'm going to go ahead and share with you passages on either side of those verses. So it's a little bit longer than what she has noted in the devotional. Like I've said, it's really important to look at context, everything around the verses. And so I want to exercise what I tell you guys and make sure that I read through that as well. So focusing on 1 Corinthians chapter 10, I'm going to read to you verses 1 through 6. This is the NASB translation. Just for context, the book of 1 Corinthians was Paul writing to the church in Corinth. He wrote several letters to the church of Corinth. This is a church that he founded during his second missionary journey. You can find that in Acts 18:1. And so the church had begun to kind of fracture a little bit. They were creating these different factions or cliques, and they were developing loyalty to and allegiance to different leaders. So there was Apollos, Paul, Peter, Christ alone. So they kind of had these little subdivisions in the church, but they were also kind of, getting swept up in all of the worldly craziness that was going on around them. There was a lot of idol worship, just various different things in the non-believer grouping around the church of Corinth, and it was starting to seep into the church. So Paul is writing to the church in Corinth just to kind of remind them of what they're supposed to be doing, kind of call out some of the stuff that they were doing. And so that is kind of the context of where this is written. And so while the accounts of Moses striking the rock are in the Old Testament, we'll look at Exodus and Numbers, Paul is actually going to refer to those accounts as he's addressing the church in Corinth. And I think this is really important for us to remember as well. There's definitely some things here that we can think about in our own terms of the church today. So 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 1-6 says, "For I do not want you to be unaware, brethren, that our fathers were all under the cloud and all passed through the sea, and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they were drinking from a spiritual rock which followed them, and the rock was Christ. Nevertheless, the most of them God was not well pleased, for they were laid low in the wilderness. Now these things happened as examples for us, so that we would not crave evil things as they also craved." So John MacArthur says his commentary in reference to this is that the Israelites misused their newfound freedom. They fell into idolatry, immorality, and rebelliousness, disqualifying themselves from receiving the Lord's blessing. So if you remember the story of the Israelites, this is Moses leading them through the wilderness as they escape Egypt. He's to be leading them to the promised land, and all along the way, various accounts through Exodus and Numbers, they are just complaining. They keep seeing all of these miracles from God firsthand, and then they just fall right back into complaining. Right before they're supposed to enter the promised land, they send in a group of spies to kind of look at it. This is the land of Canaan, and the spies come back and, are telling them that there's no way that they can take it. They can't enter it. Everybody's big and scary. There's so many of them, even though God's telling them, I got you. I'm going to take you into there. And they don't believe it. And so they actually then are punished and have to remain in the wilderness for another generation. And so that first generation completely passes away and, are not able to enter the promised land. And that also includes Moses because of his rebellion that we will see in here. And so John MacArthur also says that the Jews had a legend that the rock Moses struck followed them throughout their wilderness wanderings, providing water for them. Paul says they have a rock providing all they need, but it is Christ. Rock, and in Greek this is Petra, refers to a massive cliff, not simply a large stone or boulder, signifying the pre-incarnate Messiah or Christ who protected and sustained his people. And so Ingrid refers to this. She talks a little bit about this in her devotional, this imagery that the rock that was present in the Old Testament is Christ, and it's a typology, so it's an image of Christ, or representation of Christ in the Old Testament. And so keep that in mind as we're looking at some of the commentary and the other verses. Just such a deeper meaning than just, the on the surface level of this miracle of water coming from a rock. David Guzik says that Israel even had the presence of Jesus Christ with them in the wilderness. Here, in identifying the rock that followed them, Paul builds on a rabbinical tradition that said Israel was supplied with water by the same rock all through the wilderness, a rock that followed them. Some Bible scholars today debate as to if the rock followed Israel or if the water followed Israel, as in a stream. So there's some debate about, what this actually means. Was it a rock that they carried with them after that time, or was it that the water flowing from the rock became a stream that then ran alongside them as they continued through the wilderness? The point is the same. Jesus Christ was present with Israel in the wilderness, providing for their needs miraculously. What blessing, what privilege. Really amazing miracle there. And it's interesting to see, we look at these stories of the Israelites, and you're like, how could you not believe? How could you not trust when you're seeing all these miracles of Moses, splitting the Red Sea, and then manna falling from the sky, and the cloud and the pillar of cloud, the pillar of fire that you're following, and this abundant water that you have provided. Yet they kept not trusting. They kept arguing with Moses. They kept, just fighting it all along the way. And we do the same thing. We have the Bible. We have these accounts. We see miracles of our own type throughout our lives, and witness God working in our lives. And yet we still follow into that temptation of distrust. John MacArthur says, in reference to verse 6, which is, now these things happened as examples for us so that we would not crave evil things as they also craved. He says, they died in the wilderness because of their failure of self-discipline and consequent indulgence of every desire. 4 major sins characterized them. This is the Israelites: idolatry, sexual immorality, testing God, and complaining. We saw it in the Old Testament. And so he's writing to the church in Corinth here in the New Testament, reminding them, this is the tale as old as time, that the Israelites were falling victim to the same thing that the people of Corinth were falling victim to in their church. And so he's using that as an example and a reminder to them, hey, look what happened to the Israelites when they started going through this and behaving this way. This is a warning to you. Do not behave that way. So then Ingrid has these 2 different sections for us. So we're going to look at 2 different accounts. We're going to look at an account in Exodus 17 and then an account in Numbers 20. And for Exodus 17, 1 through 6, this is this original account of the water from the rock that we've been referring to and is being referred to in 1 Corinthians. It says, then all the congregation of the sons of Israel journeyed by stages from the wilderness of Sin, according to the command of the Lord, and camped at Rephidim, and there was no water for the people to drink. Therefore the people quarreled with Moses and said, give us water that we may drink. And Moses said to them, why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord? But the people thirsted there for water, and they grumbled against Moses and said, why now have you brought us up from Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst? So Moses cried out to the Lord, saying, what shall I do to this people? A little more and they will stone me. Then the Lord said to Moses, pass before the people and take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand your staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock at Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water will come out of it, and the people may drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. So this account is within the first year of the Exodus of the Israelites leaving Egypt. So just for context, they've gone through the Red Sea. Manna has already fallen from the sky and been provided for them. And then now they are complaining of being thirsty. Give us water. We need water. So David Guzik says that Moses was commanded in the presence of the Lord to strike the rock with his rod, and water would gush forth to satisfy the thirst of God's people. And he breaks this down. It says this was a remarkable miracle. Moses and everyone else knew that water does not normally come from rocks in such a way. This was a generous miracle. Dr. Morgan says that here again, the divine patience appears, for Jehovah uttered no other word of reproach, but in spite of their impatient unbelief, provided water out of the rock for them. This was a meaningful miracle. In striking the rock, Moses acted out a drama that perhaps he didn't understand. In 1 Corinthians 10:4, Paul wrote of Israel in the Exodus, they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. We don't know if this rock followed Israel just as Paul described, but we do know that when Jesus was struck, living water flowed out for all to receive. Herein a type of Christ, stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. And that's John Trapp, also referring to Isaiah 53:4, 1 Corinthians 10:4 that we started out with there. Jesus was struck with the rod of Moses, the curse of the law, and from him flowed water to satisfy our spiritual thirst. As the old hymn says, let the water and the blood from thy riven side which flowed be of sin the double cure, save me from its wrath and power. So much vivid imagery when you start looking at the comparison of that rock to Christ. And you may be bringing to mind, Christ being pierced in the side when he was up on the cross and water coming out of his side. And you'll see some parallels, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But this is where that typology of the rock representing Christ comes from, and we can see that here. Matthew Henry says that upon God's providence, even in the greatest straits and difficulties, God can open fountains for our supply where we least expect them, waters in the wilderness, because he makes a way in the wilderness. Those who in this wilderness keep to God's way may trust him to provide for them. While we follow the pillar of cloud and fire, surely goodness and mercy shall follow us like the water out of the rock. He's given us modern day, right? The cloud and fire. We have the Bible. We have the Holy Spirit. And he will provide for us, like he provided the water out of the rock. When we are in those desert seasons of our own faith walk where, we are the lowest of low, there's a lot of things going on, he will provide water. Maybe not necessarily in that water coming from a rock type way, but he because of his goodness and mercy, he does provide for us. Upon Christ's grace, that rock was Christ, 1 Corinthians 10:4. The graces and comforts of the Spirit are compared to rivers of living water. We see that in John 7:38, 39, 4:14. These flow from Christ, who is the rock, smitten by the law of Moses, for he was made under the law. Nothing will supply the needs and satisfy the desires of a soul but water out of this rock, this fountain opened. The pleasures of sense are puddle water. Spiritual delights are rock water, so pure, so clear, so refreshing rivers of pleasure. So again, going back to that passage in 1 Corinthians, as they started looking at, idolatry and all this immorality that was happening, they were, worshiping, there was people worshiping different gods and things like that. And so the pleasures of the world are like puddle water, dirty, murky, gross, stagnant, makes you sick, not going to sustain you. Spiritual delights are rock water. So keeping your eye on the kingdom, being in the word of God regularly, going to church and serving alongside your fellow believers, all of that is going to be these spiritual delights that are rock water, this water that we're talking about from Christ. So then her second portion here, we're looking at Numbers chapter 20. So this is going to be the second account of water coming from a rock. And so this is near the end of the 40 years of the Exodus. They've been in the wilderness this entire time. If you read the account, there's a lot of different things that they go through while they're in the wilderness for those 40 years. This generation of Israelites has been turned away from the land of Canaan. So this account is coming right after the spies had gone into the land. They faced a great battle. Many were killed. And so they were rejected from the land of Canaan due to their unbelief and distrust of the Lord. And here we are on the other side of this battle, on the other side of being turned away from the land of Canaan. The Israelites are once again complaining about the lack of water. There's some accounts that I was reading saying that it's possible that, God provided water up until that point. And then while they were going through the battles and they were in that area, there was water there for them to have. But as they're now kind of leaving away from this area that they had been in, they're once again finding themselves without water being provided. So Numbers chapter 20, verses 8 through 11 say, take the rod. This is God talking to Moses and Aaron. It says, take the rod, and you and your brother Aaron assemble the congregation and speak to the rock before their eyes, that it may yield its water. You shall thus bring forth water from them out of the rock before their eyes, that it may yield its water. You shall thus bring forth water for them out of the rock, and let the congregation and their beasts drink. So here God is, they go petition to God again. Look, they're grumbling against us. They're demanding water. Moses is very exasperated with the Israelites at this point. And God tells him not to strike the rock. He tells them to go speak to the rock, and water will be brought forth for the Israelites. So in verse 9, so Moses took the rod from before the Lord, just as he had commanded him. And Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly before the rock. And he said to them, listen now, you rebels. Shall we bring forth water for you out of this rock? Then Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod, and water came forth abundantly, and the congregation and their beasts drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you have not believed me, to treat me as holy in the sight of the sons of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given them. Those were the waters of Meribah, because the sons of Israel contended with the Lord, and he proved himself holy among them. So because of Moses and Aaron, their disobedience to what God had told them to do, they also are denied access to the Holy Land and the ability to go in there. Aaron, because of his association with Moses, he was there being told the same thing. He was there alongside Moses, and he did not stop him. He did not, he was just as responsible as Moses was at that point. And so they both were denied the ability to go into the Holy Land. John MacArthur, in reference to verse 10, where he says, "You rebels," instead of speaking to the rock, Moses spoke to the people, accusing them of being rebels against God. By his actions, Moses joined the people in rebellion against God. David Guzik says that God did not command him to speak to the nation and to speak so severely to the nation, yet Moses did. Moses, after doing what God had told him to do, then did something God had not told him to do. He lectured the nation. Worse, he lectured the nation with an attitude of heart he had not shown before, one of anger and contempt for the people of God, with a bitter heart. Before Moses fell on his face before God when the people rebelled, that's Numbers 16:4. At Meribah, when the people contended with Moses because there was no water, Moses cried out to the Lord, not against the people. And that's the account in Exodus. When the people did need to be boldly confronted, Moses did it, but without the edge of anger, contempt, and bitterness we see here. There are 100 explanations for Moses' frustrations here. You can read about that in Psalm 106, verses 32 through 33, describe how the people provoked Moses here, but not a single excuse. Worse yet, Moses not only took the rebellion of the people against the Lord too personally, he also over-magnified his own partnership with God. "Must we bring water for you out of this rock?" Moses spoke as if he and God would do the job, as if they divided the work 50-50, as if God couldn't bring water unless he was around to speak to the rock. His lapse into contempt for the people led him into a lapse of subtle pride. So many lessons for us right there. It says, "Then Moses lifted his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod." Moses disobeyed God directly, striking the rock instead of speaking to it. Not only did he strike it, but he struck it twice. When he struck the rock at the beginning of the Exodus journey, he only had to strike it once. But now, out of anger and frustration, he did it twice. Yet, despite Moses' lapse into sinful attitude and action, God still provided abundantly for the people. This teaches us that God's love for his people is so great, he will use very imperfect instruments, and that the fact God uses someone is no evidence to themselves or to the people that they themselves are really right with God or ministering according to God's heart. So God can use imperfect, broken people that they themselves are, we're all sinners, sinners that are making mistakes, that are not, there's no other Christ. There's only one Christ, only one that's lived perfectly, right? And so he can still use those people to do his work, to do good for his people that he loves. But there are still going to be consequences for those people that don't do it according to how God told them. God would deal with Moses, but the people needed water, and so it was provided. Moses might have come away thinking he did right, and the people probably thought so as well, because what Moses did seemed to work, but what works is not the best measure of what is right before God. I'll say that again, but what works is not the best measure of what is right before God. So, this instantly made me think of a lot of the false teachers that we see today. When there is scripture that defends calling out false teachers. In fact, I came across a scripture the other day that was calling out false teachers by name in the Bible. And so there is evidence of that. And oftentimes when people start to do that, they'll receive some pushback, of course, no surprise there. But what was by this false teacher that I was led to Christ, or that I, came to believe in him and to have a relationship with him. Just because it worked, just because it brought you to Christ, does not mean that that person is still right before God. That they're not a false teacher, or, just vastly doing damage to the gospel message, right? And so that doesn't negate the fact that those people can in some way still be a part of God's plan, but that shouldn't be a model and make it okay. It's not okay just because there was a good outcome. Doesn't negate the fact that their behavior wasn't right before God. So very important there. I also went over to gotquestions.org just to see what their information was, because I had, again, this was another one of those accounts where I hadn't ever really thought of the rock being a image of Christ. I just kind of thought, okay, it's a miracle. Yes, there's some parallels between Christ being living water and, water coming from the rock. But I wasn't quite sure, about the details about that. So I went over to gotquestions.org. That's a great resource. If you've got questions, you just type in your question and it pulls up all these different articles. And so in reference to this situation here, they say that the water-giving rock is used as a symbol of Christ in 1 Corinthians 10:4. The rock was struck in Exodus 17:6, just like Christ was crucified once. Hebrews 7:27. Moses speaking to the rock in Numbers 20 could have been meant as a picture of prayer. Jesus was struck once, and he continues to provide living water to those who pray in faith to him. When Moses angrily struck the rock, he destroyed the biblical typology and in effect crucified Christ again. Typology meaning a representation of Christ. Moses' punishment for disobedience, pride, and the misrepresentation of Christ's sacrifice was steep. He was barred from entering the promised land. We see that in Numbers 20:12. Yet we do not see Moses complain about his punishment. Instead, he continues to faithfully lead the people and honor God. Very, very important there. But I like this right here where it's saying, this idea that he was meant to speak to it the second time is a picture of prayer, that Christ had already been crucified, and that we are meant to now pray to receive and be provided that living water. Really, really interesting there. That might be something you want to dig into a little bit deeper. And so really just looking at the depth of imagery just in these accounts here. I kind of thought, I've read through the Bible once and I thought, well, I don't know if I'm going to continue to read through it every year. Some of these stories just become so familiar to us, especially this story for me. I've read this account several times, but to stop and just dig deep like this and study it in this way just really brings it to life and brings out details that I myself had not been able to connect and make. Really, really thankful for great theologians like John MacArthur, David Guzik, Matthew Henry, just all of these resources of men who have done deep dive studying to help us better understand some of these connections is just amazing. So lots and lots of notes today, and these will be getting transcribed into those journals. But let's go ahead and move on to the art process. So like I mentioned at the beginning, I will be journaling in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 1-6. There's obviously plenty in the kits and lots of verses referenced, so you could really spend multiple days of journaling through just this section of the rock in the wilderness. But I really wanted to sit in this because I think it's an important reminder and application to our lives today. We're living on the other side of the cross, and so this reminder for us to not do what the Israelites did, right? Not to fall into the evil things that they were doing and the grumbling, the complaining, the idolatry, all of these things that they went through. That we need to remember the miracles and we need to keep our eyes focused on Christ and receive our living water from him. And so I thought that was a good reminder for me. And so I wanted to do my journaling here in 1 Corinthians. So what I have here, we're going to play with some, of course, graph paper. We're sticking with those art supplies. We're going to do some jelly plate prints. And then I pulled out a few items from the kit here. So there's this clear sticker, of course, of the rock with the water. Definitely thought that should be included in there. And then there's this one of the girl. And so I wanted to kind of layer her on here that I want to be lifted up by the living water. I want to be standing upon this truth. And then we'll create a little title here, My Rock in the Wilderness. And then I pulled this piece out. This was just kind of my reference and idea, the color palette I wanted to use for the background. And then we are also going to play with some more printables. So these are a couple of the printable backgrounds. This is the one that you get if you order the digital devotional kit. And then this one comes in the digital add-on kit, I believe. I believe this is the add-on kit. So the digital version of the add-on kit does come with some backgrounds as well. So I just printed those out on cardstock, and we're going to create some ephemera pieces with these printables. So, I do mention that you can get the devotional kit. When you order the devotional kit, you get a 50% off of the digital version of the devotional kit. And this is a reason to take advantage of that because you don't get these backgrounds in the physical kit. But this gives you even more, you get all the images that you get in the physical kit plus some. Same thing with the add-on kit. The add-on kit was a physical item that you could order that had stickers and things like that, but the digital version has all of these great backgrounds as well. And so great option, especially if you're not wanting to do all the messy mixed media that I'm going to be showing you. You very easily could just use this as your background. So let me go ahead, put you guys on fast forward, and we'll put together this entry in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. All right, so I'm starting with this. This is a Gelli plate. I have the 8x10 size. And we're going to make friends with this thing because I've had it for a little while. So I've got it laid out on my desk. And I'm going to be printing on some of this really inexpensive graph paper. This is very thin, but it's perfect. So I have a scrap piece of it off to the side. And we are going to start by laying down a layer of pumice stone distress paint. And I'm just using a brayer, and I'm going to just continuously go back and forth over this plate until it seems like I have a nice, even, thin coat of that paint. I'm also going to splatter on a little bit of Victorian Velvet Distress Oxide Spray and some Pumice Stone Distress Oxide Spray. Distress products kind of bead up on this plate, so they just behave a little bit differently than acrylic paint that you may see in some of the other videos for using a Gelli plate. I sprayed a little bit of water because I want to take advantage of that water reactivity of distress paints and inks. And then I just lay down the graph paper, I rub over it with a pressure tool, and then pull off the print. Make sure it's good and dry. So I've got this kind of messy looking background, but we're going to add some layers. That's the fun part of using a Gelli plate. So I've cleaned my plate, cleaned my brayer. I'm now going in with just some plain white acrylic paint, and I'm applying a pretty generous layer. I found that thicker was better than thinner, but not too thick. You just kind of have to play. And now I'm going to make some impressions in the paint. So I'm working pretty quickly because I don't want the paint to dry. I've pulled out a variety of stamps from Open Journey, and this works better with more like solid stamps. You'll see sometimes I'm doing like a double impression because the idea is I'm trying to remove some of the white paint. This is creating little windows. Think of it as windows where that gray background is going to peep through. So I'm kind of brushing off the ink off the stamp, making sure the stamp's good and dry, and using that to lift some of the paint. Again, I'm working super quick because I don't want this layer of white paint to dry. I tried this with a thinner layer of paint, and the paint just dries too quick. You do also want to clean off your stamps pretty quickly because it's acrylic paint that's going on them. So you may even want to like drop them into a bucket of soapy water until you can get to them. But while that paint is still dry or still wet, I'm going to reapply this same page down over the Gelli plate, pull off the print, and this gives me this really neat look here. Lots of texture. You have that kind of like ghost imaging of those stamps. I made sure it was good and dry, and now we're going to add some more layers. So I've sprayed out some frayed burlap distress spray stain onto a nonstick craft mat, and then I'm dipping this paper into that. And what you'll find is the acrylic paint kind of acts like a resist, and then the places where you stamped have left the paper raw, so to speak. I mean, there is that distress paint we laid down, but so the sprays that we're putting on here, this is Vintage Photo Distress Oxide Spray, are kind of reacting differently between the white acrylic paint and the areas that we stamped, and it's just really bringing out those stamped areas. It's adding lots of texture. I mean, this is just super fun. This would be a good idea to play with and make a bunch of backgrounds ahead of time if you're just feeling creative but don't want to create an entire Bible journaling page. Just sit down and play and get to know your mediums. Try this with acrylic paints, try this with sprays, try this with your distress paints, try it with stamps, try it with stencils, various different things like that, and just build up the layers. And you can do all of this on a scrap piece of paper, and you're not making a mess in your Bible. So if this was horrible, I could throw it away and try again. And really great when you're using inexpensive paper like graph paper. You know, it's not really wasting anything other than using, the mediums that you're using. So I'm just continuously dipping this in there, kind of building it up, adding water, and here it is nice and dry. I've trimmed off the edges, and this is going to be my background. So I'm trying to figure out, because this is a little bit larger than my page, so I'm trying to figure out exactly what orientation that I want, making sure I get some of those elements that I really like in there. And this really, I love all the texture, and it didn't take much effort to get all of that with the help of that Gelli plate. So just like the last process video, we're going to glue this down. So I am using some Ranger Matte Gel Medium, since that is a glue type medium, and I'm using that to glue this page down into my interleaved Bible. So I'm just making sure that that page is completely covered. While this is gluing that page down, it's also acting like a barrier. So this is now protecting my interleaved Bible page. So anything I add over the top of this, if I want to get messy, which I will not bleed through this page. It's creating a barrier while also gluing down this page. So make sure that that is good and dry, trim off the edges, and then I kind of use my brayer tool just to push that page, make sure it's nice and flat and pushed into the matte gel medium, and then make sure again that it's good and dry. Distressed products react with moisture, react with water. So I am going to add a layer of clear gesso over the top of this. And I've found that if you make sure your distressed products are really good and dry before you add on another wet layer, you don't get as much movement. So I'm using gesso here because I want a little bit of texture. I want some tooth so that when I add other things over the top of this, it kind of grips onto the page. If you use matte gel medium, it's very, very smooth. So products don't like grip a hold of the page. So I'm working pretty quick. I'm not overworking the page because it is going to reactivate some of those sprays that we had dipped the page in. But now this page is nice and good and sealed and dry. So we can start building on some layers. So I've pulled out some Ranger grit paste, and I'm using a palette knife to lay this down in some areas. I've just laid down my stickers to make sure I'm not putting this paste where I'm going to put those stickers. The clear stickers don't really play nice over texture paste, so I need to keep that in mind. I'm using grit paste because it's kind of like a stucco texture. So this just adds something different than just regular texture paste, which is more smooth. This just has a little bit more grit and grunge to it. And I'm not wanting to completely cover up my background because we put work into it. So I do want to see that, but I want to bring in some contrast at this point. So I let that set aside and dry, and now we're going to work on our ephemera pieces. So I've pulled out those printable pages. Remember, those are printed on cardstock. And I'm just figuring out what part of that background I want to stamp these floral stamps on. And I do believe these are still available at Open Journey. These are also Open Journey stamps. I like 95% of this video is Open Journey, like stamps, printables, things like that. So I am using a stamp positioning tool just so I can stamp a whole bunch of these all at once. Makes it very, very simple. So I'm laying those out on that background paper. I will pick it up with the lid of the stamp positioning tool. Unfortunately, this one has been discontinued, but I will link an alternative down below for you guys. It is a very helpful tool to have. I'm going to ink those up with some black VersaFine Onyx Black ink. This is my favorite kind of detail ink to use, and when you heat set it, it is permanent. I'm just using that same pressure tool to apply pressure to get a nice even impression. I don't get a perfect one in the center, but it's okay. I'm not going to use that flower, so I didn't worry about it too much. And I can just leave those stamps on the lid, load up that second piece of paper, and then re-stamp these. And so this has given us colored, filled in stamps, and all I have to do is cut these out. Very, very simple. So I went ahead and fussy cut those out. Here is what those look like. You could, again, do those a whole bunch ahead of time. You could even use some jelly prints and stamp on the jelly prints and create ephemera pieces that way. So now we're going to start assembling. You'll see I've cut off just a little bit of the backer sheet of the sticker. That way I can align it exactly where I want before releasing the entire sticker. I have made the mistake of just pulling the whole backing off of a large sticker like this, and it's a little sketchy getting that applied down. So it's easier to do it that way. Same thing with this little girl. I'm just going to expose just a little bit, position her where I want, and it kind of creates a hinge, so then I can release the rest of the paper and then stick her down on there. And you'll see, since I left that kind of center area pretty neutral, blank, not a whole lot of busyness, it doesn't conflict with those stickers. And then I'm just arranging these floral ephemera pieces in a couple different areas on the page, because at this point it's pretty flat. I mean, other than the texture paste, it's just, the inks, the clear stickers, it's very one-dimensional. So I stuck down or glued down those flowers, and now I'm building my title. And initially I was just going to adhere it directly on the page. But again, I was feeling like it was just one dimensional. So I pulled the remnants of those printables out and I'm sticking all of the title pieces down on that first. So that My Rock piece is a clear sticker from the devotional kit. And then I'm using a variety of stamps to stamp out in the wilderness. And then I will cut these out and create like little word fetty basically. And that's going to add some more paper to this page to kind of go along with those paper flowers. That way I have a little bit more texture and I don't have to worry about messing up my stamping. I was a little nervous about stamping on that background because it did have the ripples in the paper. And so I wasn't sure if it was going to stamp super well. And so this allows me to make mistakes off the page and then just glue this onto the page. So if you are a messy stamper, that might be a good option for you. Before I stick those down, I'm just kind of running my fingernail along the edges to roughen them up. That way they're not just flat against the page. Again, just adding a little bit of texture. And then I'm using some liquid glue to attach that. Because there's so much texture on this background, I found that liquid glue is the best adhesive when gluing things down. And this one dries pretty quickly. So I just have to hold it for a second in place and then it gets tacky pretty fast and grabs a hold. And so it's not too difficult to work with that particular glue. So now we're going to add some splatters. So I'm just going to mask off that center area because I don't want any big splatters in that area. And I'm going to start with the same combination I used in the last video. I'm using ground espresso and aged mahogany distress paint, adding a little bit of water to that, and getting a nice sopping wet floppy paintbrush. And I will splatter that onto the page in a few different areas. Again, it's, having that center area masked off so I don't oops and get big droplets, right where I don't want it. And then I'm going to heat this just for a second to dry it. And then I'm going to pick up the paint with a paper towel while it's still wet. And it's going to leave this kind of ghost impression of the paint on there. And I'm going to recover this up and go in with my acrylic black ink. And this first one, I was like, oh my gosh, I ruined the page. That is a big, huge blob of ink. That's not what I wanted. But in the end, I'm kind of glad it kind of balanced things out and it worked out. But I'm basically just kind of emptying the dropper in the bottle and then just using the remnants that's in the dropper to kind of like spit the ink onto the page. And that is going to bring in some more contrast to this. And since that's a big puddle of ink, I actually take the corner of a paper towel and just lightly stick that right in the center just to kind of sop up any of the excess ink. That way, it dries a little bit quicker. And then I just make sure everything is good. Heat set, dry. Now we're coming in for some highlights, some details. So I'm using a white acrylic paint pen and just adding some details to the center of these flowers just to bring in some highlights. I felt like they were a little flat. And this is, you could really do this on, your sticker paper also, any of your ephemera pieces, just kind of add some more detail to, pieces like that. And then I'm also adding some highlight details to this stamping. Because the background, the jelly print piece was very kind of like one-dimensional with the color, I'm wanting to bring in the black and the white to add contrast elements to this page. I didn't want it too flat. I'm also going in and just kind of going around these pieces, again, to bring in some more black, some more interest, just little details like that really bring the entire page together. And then I highlighted the passage, but I also wrote down those other passages that we studied for this page. And then I took out one of those washi sticker pieces from the kit, and I'm just going to use that to kind of underline it, frame it, draw your eye over to this other part of the page. And that way it kind of ties both sides of the page in together. And that's going to be it. So here's a look at the back side of the page. You can see no bleed through because it was sealed in with that matte gel medium and gesso. And that is it. So if you have any questions or comments, be sure to leave those down below for me. Check out the description box for links to everything that I used today. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel if you're not already subscribed. And until next time, thank you so much. Bye-bye.